get started.
We're ready when you are. Go ahead.
Sweet. Morning, folks. Appreciate you coming here to start the day off. I'm Jerod Brennen. I am currently a senior sales engineer at SailPoint, an identity and access management vendor. Over the course of the 20 years that I've been doing this stuff, I've done day-to-day implementation, management. I've had a couple of teams that have been mine. I've done third-party risk assessments, pen testing, love web app pen testing. A lot of that on the enterprise side. I've also got a lot of consulting experience, so helping people figure out how to do this stuff. So what I put together today is kind of the trifecta of this is what it's like to do this stuff day to day. Mixed in with a blend of information that you'd be provided by consultants teaching you how to do this stuff, mixed in with all the other nerds and geeks I get to talk to on the back end who are actually building technology to address some of these challenges. It would have been about mid, I guess, in my career. I was working for a very large retailer in Columbus, Ohio, and we were tasked with deploying and managing an identity and access management platform for 3,000 office workers, something like 60,000 retail workers, seasonal especially, right? If anybody works retail, you know it's in and out. And our goal was to automatically provision and deprovision accounts on the day somebody showed up. Because at this retailer, people would show up, they would think they were going to do one thing, find out the job was something else entirely, and then they'd quit before orientation was done. So we had to have them provisioned before they showed up and then deprovisioned before lunchtime. And we could only do that with the tech we deployed. But I learned a lot in that time. And so what I want to share with you today is just lessons learned. I don't know if the slides are going to be available after. I think the organizers are putting them out on the website, but if not, hit me up. I'm real big on sharing and teaching, and so you can have this stuff. Just let me know. I have to get the buzzword bingo out of the way. And there is method to my madness here. How many folks, if you look at your organization and what you do day to day when it comes to identity, how many of you are making decisions as a company based on digital transformation? Trying to move faster, trying to change how you engage the customer? All right. How many of you are more on the zero trust side, right? We've expanded a little too quickly. Maybe we've got some looseness in our permissions and privileges, and we're trying to rein all that in order to contain possible threats, to get ahead of possible data breaches. Anybody making those? If I had to ask which ones are retail and which ones are government, I think I could pick the two. What I learned early on, before I went into retail, I was at a public utility. The public utility I worked for was very risk averse. And the changes that they made in their environment, anytime we deployed a technology, it was to reduce risk. And in some cases, right, it's a matter of physical safety, right? If somebody gets into a SCADA network and screws around with nuclear reactors, that's a loss of life, right? That's a disastrous scenario. At retailers, right, we just sell t-shirts, we just sell hammers. People are willing to move much more quickly and take a lot more risks. When you are making changes to your identity program, it's critical that you understand the people that you're talking to in the different leadership roles, because not everybody's got the same risk appetite. And you already have an idea, just from show of hands, you already have an idea of what messages are going to resonate with your leadership. Keep that in mind as we go throughout the rest of the talk. This one gets away from leadership and gets more to the day-to-day, right? The people who are doing this stuff hands-on. When you look at your identity activities, right, all the things you do around identity, do you feel that the people working on that stuff are focused on high-value activities or low-value activities? Anybody high-value doing the more strategic stuff? Anybody doing things that could be automated with a very small shell script? So, both. All right, and that's fair. That's probably the more realistic, right, that bell curve. When I was a hiring manager, I hired people so that I could train them to be good enough to not work for me anymore. I know that I'm a curious person. I like to grow. I like to learn. One of the reasons I've had some of the successes I've had in my career is because I've had the opportunity to work with people who've given me a chance to explore. If you hire somebody and then stick them in a job where they're just reviewing logs all day or creating Active Directory accounts, they're going to get bored and they're going to leave. But they're not going to grow, right? They're not going to be able to do the cool, smart, creative stuff they were hired to do in the first place. That is a big factor when you're talking about identity governance and identity and access management. When you start to refine your program and build things out, you can take people who are doing those repetitive tasks and put them on the cool stuff, which has, just for me, it's a personal thing. It's there's a lot of value to that at a personal level. Before I dive into some of the how-to, just want to make sure we've all got some of the same language, because I know everybody's coming from some different background. When I talk identity and access management or identity governance and administration, I'm really talking about people having access to things. At its simplest, that's all we're talking about. But it's not just like Active Directory accounts, right? It's somebody needs a badge, somebody needs physical access to a building. Whatever you're giving people access to, the ability to track that and automate it is really what that program looks like. So when I look at identity, and this is some of the language we use internal at the company I'm with, there are 3 types of activities that I care about: joiner, mover, leaver. A joiner is when someone enters into a relationship with your organization. The most common example is you hire an employee, but it's not the only example, right? If you engage contractors or consultants and you want to put them on your network for a minute before you take their access away, that's a joiner event. You've got suppliers, partners, volunteers, interns, doctors, nurses, students. I mean, there's a whole population of people who might not fit into that full-time employee bucket, but they still need access to things in order to do what you're trying to do. So when that relationship starts, that's a joiner event. When the relationship ends, right, that's a leaver event. And that leaver event can get messy. I spent some time working in higher ed, right? Nobody ever leaves higher ed, right? They just move to a different area, right? They're either an employee, a student, they're alumni. If they're on the med center side, then they're doctor, patient, nurse, right? It's complicated. And when people retire from an organization, they still may have some relationship for benefits and healthcare, right? Somebody goes on, the end of it, right? When they no longer need all the access, that's leaver. But that middle ground, the mover, is where something changes in that person's job, but they're still actively engaged somehow, which is where I put, transfers and promotions, right? Somebody decides they're fed up with IT and they want to go work in legal, right? So now they need a whole different batch of access. If I have somebody who goes on short-term disability, right? Or somebody who goes on sabbatical, maternity leave, paternity leave, where they're not going to be there for an extended period of time, but I don't just want to shut everything down. I want to maybe disable a couple of things and pull them back. Understanding those mover events is kind of tricky, but if you approach your identity program saying, look, I'm going to put everything that's happening into one of these 3 buckets. It's either a joiner event, a mover event, or a leaver event. You'll find that it's a lot easier to start to identify and build out the processes that you need. And it's a heck of a lot easier when you're trying to communicate with people outside of your team who don't have the same depth of knowledge or understanding that you bring to the table. So that's your IAM primer. The first thing I recommend you do when you're building out your identity program is seek first to understand. So take a look at all of the accounts, right? We're not going out and making any changes. We're just going out and doing discovery. How are people accessing the things that they're accessing? Well, chances are there's a username, password, maybe a multi-factor token somewhere that you put the right combination together and they can get on a Linux box, they can get on a domain, they can get into an internal web app, they can get into like an external software as a service web app, right? If you start to look for these accounts, it's going to start to paint a picture of what's in scope for your identity program. Now, and when I use the word identity, I'm being very deliberate. And identity is not an account, right? I'm Jerod. I have a couple of Gmail accounts. I have more social media accounts than I care to admit. I've got my work account. I've got my online banking account. I've got all these different accounts that are different usernames, different passwords. But at the end of the day, I am one flesh and blood person. And that's the identity that's connected to all those separate accounts. By identifying all of the accounts, you're going to get a better idea of how they roll up to an identity. So like I mentioned, with the joiner events, we've got employees, which might be full-time, part-time, seasonal employees, which can get a little tricky, people who are still employed but are away for a minute, people retired alumni. All of these tend to be governed by HR. So human resources is going to say, hey, come to us. We're the folks you need to talk to about those accounts, and we'll help map them back to identities. But there's a whole population over here that HR, as nice as they are, doesn't want anything to do with, right? They're busy with benefits and healthcare and training and all the things they're providing, all the services that they were hired to provide for employees. Then now we've got contractors, consultants, we've got accounts that live at the machine level, right? Like if you've got admin rights, you might have your regular day-to-day account, and then you might have accounts that give you elevated privileges. You're going to have those built-in admin accounts and some of the admin apps if you're in IT and running systems, all these things that HR doesn't want anything to do with, right? That's not their world. And then customers is another, where we've got a whole population of users who are accessing more and more of our stuff, but they don't live in any of these environments. From an identity and access management perspective, you want to look at all of them. Then make decisions about which ones you want to govern and which ones you want to address. Is anybody doing anything with bots today? RPA, robotic process automation? I just started playing around with UiPath. I've got a bot I'm trying to build that does OSINT gathering for web, just all publicly available information you can get on the web, but I'm trying to automate it to a point that I can send an email to a Gmail address, and then the bot will kick me back all the OSINT for the organization I'm profiling. It's really a fun time to be playing around with technology like that because it's accessible to people like me who, I don't do it in my day-to-day job, I'm just doing it as a hobbyist. Organizations that are deploying bots are giving them access. I mean, they've become their own identity, but who's managing that stuff, right? That's another thing that HR, if they don't want to talk to contractors who are flesh and blood, then they're not going to talk to your RPA bots either. So they're a little different than your system service accounts, but you want to find all of these accounts and you want to figure out who governs this, who makes decisions about policy and turning accounts on and turning them off. Start there, and then you're going to follow, it's kind of like a breadcrumb trail, right? Because the accounts are likely going to live in a directory. Now, most of them may be Active Directory. You might have apps that have like a local database of accounts that people aren't pointing all the internal apps to AD. Software as a service apps tend to have their own accounts, even if you're doing federated authentication, right, like single sign-on or SAML. You're still going to have accounts that live out there that users might be able to log in with. And as you're tracking these, you're going to find that every account's got at least username, password, maybe a token. And then once they get in, they're going to have access to two different types of data. Structured data is all the database stuff, right? Apps are usually built on this. Unstructured data is like file shares, email. And that's, I saw Varonis up there, right? I know there are vendors in the space who have ways of looking at that. They can help explain it in even more detail. But this is what we're saying. What can these accounts get to? What can they access? It's going to be one of these two types of data. And then you're going to find that there are accounts that have the ability to create and destroy system level objects. They can create and delete user accounts, these privileged accounts. They can do more, and we talked about bots and service accounts. When you find all of these accounts, right, eventually audit is going to come to you and say, all right, so what can they do? Are all the accounts that are turned on supposed to be turned on? Are all the accounts that have access to things, do they have the appropriate level of access? When we talk about all the IAM universe, all the things that are in scope that are connected back to these accounts, that's what I'm talking about, all these activities. So if you've got an idea of all the accounts, this is going to lead you to, well, what systems do we have in play? And when I say system, I'm not talking about servers. I'm talking about a collection of like processes, technology that performs some business function, right? Like if you've got an ERP system, enterprise resource planning, right? ERP systems are not just a box, right? They're a lot of bits and pieces. Start to identify all of your systems. Does anybody have like a CMDB in place today, configuration management database? That's shops that go down the ITIL path where you're trying to build that consistency of your operations. They tend to grab this info. So you may have people at your organization who already have a complete list of all the systems that are in scope. Talk to them to get some of the info. For your apps, you're going to want to look on-prem and SaaS. I've done enough third-party risk assessments to tell you that even mature security organizations have people using web apps to host your data and to perform some business function that IT doesn't know about, security doesn't know about, purchasing doesn't know about. But from an identity perspective, that's in scope for what you're trying to do with your IAM program. If somebody's using it for work, and if there's an identity tied to an account, tied to access, it's in scope. And then also local accounts as well. But you want to look around for all of these things because this is where the accounts are going to be stored, and you're going to start painting a picture of what your environment looks like to give some context to all the things that people can access, because not every account is equal, right? You've got some basic accounts that can only do 2 or 3 things versus privileged accounts that can do a lot of things. In the middle, there's this notion of, how do I say it, like data classification and users who have different levels of access based on their job. Does anybody have like a data classification policy in place already? Are you 3 tiers or 4 or 5? 5, oh my gosh. 5's too complicated for me. If it works, it works. I'm a fan. I've seen the 4-tier model work pretty well. And I hesitate to make it too complex because finding that balance between simplicity and security is a daily thing with me. At a minimum, if you've not explored data classification, you should have at least 3 tiers. I don't know how to get past this, right? You're going to have data that everybody can see, even if they don't work for your organization. That's public. Your marketing website, if your marketing website isn't publicly available, you got bigger problems. Internal data is stuff that if you work for the company, you're allowed to see it, right? But if you have certain data sets that are restricted to, like doctors and nurses can only see medical records. People doing customer service can only see credit card numbers, and even then can only see one at a time. You're going to have certain data sets that are regulated or that you want to protect with a little extra vigor, a little more attention. Even if you're like manufacturing some of your intellectual property, even though it doesn't have like an external regulation bound to it necessarily, you might still say, well, we don't want everybody in the company to have access to that IP. When you start to find all these accounts and map them back to systems, you need to start painting a picture of which systems are the most important, because otherwise you're going to get stuck. You're not going to get anywhere. You've got to start small and build up from there. What I have done both in my consulting days and even now in the role that I'm in, I do these maturity assessments around identity where it's really, I'll talk about the IDSA in just a sec, 25 questions about what we should be doing in our identity programs. And instead of saying, are we doing it yes or no, I use the capability maturity model's 5-point scale. If you've not done any maturity work, it comes out of the DoD. I think it's at Carnegie Mellon now. But you've got 5 tiers of how well are we doing it. With 1 being individual heroics, literally 1 person at the company who knows how to do it. I was doing a PCI self-assessment for someone when I was consulting. They were trying to figure out credit card security and wanted somebody to come in who'd done it before. And as I'm doing it, I got to the point about terminating accounts. If somebody has left the organization, PCI says you got to turn off their access. This is pretty common in a lot of public standards and frameworks. So I asked my contact, who does this? Oh, that's this one guy. I don't even remember his name, this one guy. So we go to his desk and he's not there. It's close to lunchtime, something maybe he just left early for lunch. So I asked the person in the desk next to the empty desk, I'm like, hey, is so-and-so here? No, he's not in today. Oh, is he in like later this week? No, I think he's on vacation. All right, well, while he's out, whose job is it to turn off accounts when people don't work here anymore? And I get this deer in headlights look. And the guy says, I don't know, he's the only one who's got access. He's the only one who knows how to do it. Number one, that's not going to pass an audit. Number two, that puts you in a bad way from a security perspective if somebody leaves angry, right? And if somebody leaves with intent to do harm, leaving their account on until somebody gets to it just opens you up to risk. And from a maturity standpoint, that's at level one, right? That's, you got one person who can do it and you know the risks are there, but you're accepting them. As soon as you write this stuff down, you get to level two, repeatable. And it's repeatable because you can hand that document to somebody else and say, here, you do it. And that way, if you're out, you can have a backup, even hopefully if it's their first time doing it. As soon as you introduce some sort of automation, like a PowerShell script, a Python script, now you're at that level three. Now, not only do you have consistency, but you've taken human error out of the equation. It's automatically going to flow from A to B to C. As soon as you start tracking metrics around the thing that you're trying to do, that's a 4. Metrics give you the ability to say, hey, we're doing all this stuff month in, month out. Are we getting better? Are we actually doing what we set out to do? If you don't measure it at some point, you're never going to improve. You might not even be doing what you think you're doing. But if you get to a level 5, optimizes, that's when it's so seamless that it's not disruptive to the business at all, right? Things just work. Stuff just flows. If somebody needs access to a thing, they get it and they're able to do their job. And then when they don't need it, it's gone and they don't even notice. So not every organization wants to be at a 5 because you can imagine 5 can get expensive, which is why you've got to go back and say, well, what's in scope? What's the most important? If I can't do everything, unless you're one of those rare organizations that has infinite budget, infinite staff, if I can't do everything, then I'm just going to focus on the stuff that's the most important to the business, or I'm going to be focusing on the stuff that's the highest risk. 25 questions where I say, where are you today and where do you want to be? And then I give that to the leadership and say, all right, these are your answers. I'm not an auditor. This is not my opinion. This is what you said. What are you going to do about it? It's a great tool and you can all do a self-assessment. Every one of you can go out and build your own little self-assessment tool in like an hour. It's just a spreadsheet, and then have that conversation with your leadership and get to that point that you've got an idea of what you want to do. So all of that is discovery, the accounts and systems, the data classification, and the self-assessment. At that point, you're ready to start engaging people outside of IT. I like to start with a steering committee, put people on the hook with expectations that you're actually going to participate. You might do it once a quarter, you might do it twice a year, depending on what folks are comfy with. It's all company culture. Even if you just do it once in 2020, one time, you're already moving that needle, right? You're getting better. You do want people with the technology bend on the steering committee because they're going to be doing a lot of this work. But you want people with C in their title because they're going to be the ones making decisions about who's working on what and where are we spending money. CIO, CISO, if you've got dedicated people doing identity work, you want them at the table. Some director level where it could be the person over AD, it could be the person over application development. Wherever you're creating user accounts, you want somebody with that director level vision at the table. And then you also want people who are doing this stuff day to day, because what I find without fail is the people at the top have a different opinion or understanding of what's happening than the people who are doing it day to day. And it's like that game of telephone. It's got to go through so many layers that by the time it gets up to the top, that message isn't always as clear as it can be unless you put all these people in a room around a table and have them talk it out. You also want people who are there from the business, because if your steering committee is only IT, you're missing it. You're not connecting with the people that we're here to help. Now the business, you're going to have line of business people, depending on what your business is, how you make money, how you provide goods or services to the customer base. You want some of these line of business leaders there, but you also want, ideally, HR, that's a given. I like to have legal there, especially as we see more and more privacy laws coming to bear. Legal's role is becoming even more and more important. And audit. Auditors are your friends. I said it. Engage audit early and then say, look, we're trying to get better. Is what we're doing lining up with what you're looking for? If you've got a steering committee that's got a pretty good mix of these people and you give them that maturity assessment, it totally changes how you approach building out your program. Because now instead of fighting for one thing or another thing, they're saying, oh yeah, we already decided that this is the most important thing to the company. What do we need to give you to make that happen? How can this happen this year, next year? But that's first step, the committee. And then once you've got that committee, you want to ask some uncomfortable questions like, who owns identity? Do you have an answer for that at your company? Who owns identity at your company? Yeah, it's a tough one. And it's not necessarily that there's just one answer, right? Human resources may say, look, we own identity for employees, but we don't own accounts. Well, good. All right, now we're having a conversation. Now we're making progress. The accounts are all the technical teams. But you want to start with who owns identity, because this concept of governance, of making decisions about what's going to happen, that's ultimately going to roll up to an owner. And I'm not a fan of ownership by committee. If you put two people and say, well, they co-own it, then when something goes south, it's a finger-pointing game, right? I thought they were going to do it. No, I thought they were going to do it. Usually, if you can get down to like a title, you don't have to put a name, but like director of HR, VP of HR, right? If you get that level, you'll get a good list of owners. And then you want to start identifying some of the activity. What do you do around joiner, mover, leaver events? Well, who actually does that? Who creates Active Directory accounts at your company? Who resets passwords? Who handles benefits, right? I mean, you already know the answers to some of these questions, but you want to write it down, because if you've got all that information you've collected in the discovery of all these systems and apps, you're going to find that there are things that you just assume, for example, that people are going into your software as a service apps and turning off accounts for people who've left the company. Are they? So who's responsible for what? This is more like a technology leadership. Are we a cloud-first organization? That term is very distinct. It's got very specific meaning. Is anybody here using that language internally? Cloud-first? I dig it. How long has your company been in business? 5 years?
Asking me?
Yeah.
Long time, 50 years.
50. So you're ahead of the game. Organizations that go cloud first say, we're going to put stuff in somebody else's data center, right? Unless we absolutely have to do it in ours. When I talk to, I've got friends up in Columbus who work for startups that are in that 5-10 year range. They don't want spinning platters, which, I mean, I know we don't have magnetic disk so much anymore, but that's still the term they use, right? They don't want any technology in-house. They want everything to be somebody else's problem because they just want to focus on the business. And you're going to see that trend continue, and it's going to impact how you do this identity thing. Because if you're building your program for the old way of doing things, and your leadership is saying, look, we don't want this stuff in our data center. We want everything in the cloud. Then you need to bring that to bear with all the activity you're doing. And then how do you prioritize this list of 3? And this list is very specific, and there are no ties. If you ask this question, do not let somebody say, well, they're all important. No, that's not the point. I need 1, 2, 3. Because risk reduction tells me that I'm risk averse as an organization. I'm going to be more interested in zero trust. Cost reduction tells me that you're not so interested in what I'm doing as long as the numbers are better next year. And then business enablement tells me that digital transformation, better customer experience is a message that's going to resonate throughout the organization. When I worked public utilities, risk reduction and cost reduction fought for 1 and 2, but risk reduction was number 1. When I worked in retail, business enablement was number 1, then cost reduction, then risk reduction. You need to understand 1, 2, 3 of your organization if you want the things that you're telling them to click. Otherwise, you'll be talking into the ether. You won't get the response you're looking for. I'm a fan of writing things down. I've worked with people who intentionally avoid policy. I don't get it. I went to school to be a teacher, and what I learned in my student teaching, and I'm also a parent of 3, 1 in college, 2 in high school. What I've continued to learn by parenting, if you tell somebody something once, that doesn't mean they get it, right? If you set an expectation verbally, don't expect everybody to even interpret it. If you work in an organization that has an international workforce, you'll also find that culturally, even the word yes or gestures like nodding have different meaning to different people based on where they grew up. So if you write things down about, we know what's in scope, we know what we want to do, let's start putting that on paper. Now you've got a communication mechanism for everybody, right? You can put that out. Everybody in the organization knows what their password has to look like. Everybody knows that they're not supposed to put stuff on their computer that doesn't belong there, and that they're only accessing things that they need to do their job, right? Put this stuff down in writing. You'll have maybe like an IAM policy, a data classification policy. You might put some of this in acceptable use, but as you're starting to figure this identity thing out, take a minute and write it down. What I mentioned during the maturity assessment discussion, the IDSA, Identity Defined Security Alliance. First, does anybody know who this group is? Has anybody heard of them? All right, another question. How many of you have heard of OWASP? All right, oh boy, that's like half the room right there. So for folks who haven't, OWASP, Open Web Application Security Project, has been around 20 plus years. And they do all things application security. It's a not-for-profit global organization with tens of thousands of people working on projects and documentation and cheat sheets. And if you do any application security work, OWASP is your jam. They are the people who have all the stuff you need. If you go to buy an application security scanner and it doesn't check for the OWASP top 10, chances are it's not going to make it through the vetting process, because they have become that integral to application security that they're kind of the standard for how we get our foundation in web app security. The IDSA is kind of like OWASP year 1, but for identity. So it's a very new, very young organization, but it's not for profit. They've got a director who's driving a lot of steering committees, and they've already published a framework for how to do identity. They've got use cases, they've got reference architectures, they've got input from I don't know how many dozens vendors and consulting companies, people who have been living this life for years. And because it's all these people, it's not one vendor saying, do it our way. It's kind of a vendor agnostic. No, these principles apply regardless of what you're trying to do. If you're doing identity, this stuff is useful. They've got the 25 controls I use in my maturity assessment, copy paste out of this framework. And it's free. You don't even have to register to download it. It's there on their website, IDS Alliance. So as you're building out policies, as you're doing that framework and you're talking to people about identity, take a minute to look at that framework and start to bring some of that language into your conversation. Because if they continue on the trajectory they're on, then in 5 years, it's going to be like the go-to starting point. Are you doing identity right? Yeah, actually, it lines right up with the IDSA. And then you want to write down some relevant metrics. If you want to improve, you have to measure. I don't know a way around it. And I say relevant because depending on your audience, not everybody cares about the same numbers, right? If I'm looking at antivirus numbers and I say, yeah, I've got 99.7% coverage of all my Windows machines that are running the latest engine with the latest definitions. Your CEO doesn't care, never will. That as soon as you said AV engine, you lost them, right? But if you can say over the past month we've had 0 help desk tickets related to malware, which means that we're not paying for people to clean up problems that we've automated through technology. Okay, now you're talking my language, right? You're saving money. I appreciate that. But you flip that around. The people who are doing this stuff day to day, they want to be recognized for all the work that they're putting into it. And that's fair. You should be doing that. If somebody is spending all their day creating accounts and resetting passwords, track that and give them credit. And then as you start to go down the path of improving your IAM program, you can go to those numbers and say, yeah, we used to have this many password resets a day, which resulted in this many phone calls to the help desk. When we automated that password reset functionality, that number dropped. Now look, that's a lot of time and money we're saving. We're able to take those people on the desk and put them on more complicated tasks because they're not doing something we could do with a very small shell script. So understand your audience, and then always, always, always try to figure out what's the business problem that this technical solution is addressing, right? Get in the habit of mapping stuff back to the business. To my point with the antivirus, right? Yeah, security people, we don't want infected machines on our network. We understand at our core that that is bad. But people in leadership just want their employees to be able to do their job, right? So addressing that antivirus question in the language of business productivity and cost savings, translate that over to all the identity work you're doing, all the manual activity you're doing. Can you automate that to help users do what they're trying to do more quickly, more effectively? Different metrics for different audiences. And now you're ready to start engaging your project managers. I've got a friend who's a project manager, and it doesn't matter what environment. He's worked at large financial institutions, large insurance institutions, small consulting companies. He's got the same methodology he applies wherever he goes because it works, right? First thing you want to do when you've got all this information, right? You know what your environment looks like. You know what leadership is interested in tackling. Put together a strategic plan. Just next year we're going to do this, and then the year after we're going to do this. The examples I have up here aren't yours, right? This isn't necessarily right for your organization. You've got to take the info from that maturity assessment and say, all right, what's the most important thing for us to do this year? If you're getting hammered by audit about disabled accounts belonging to, or active accounts belonging to terminated employees, then just automating deprovisioning is going to be a huge deal. But if you've outsourced your service desk and you're paying something like $3, $5 a phone call, and you can show an immediate cost savings to automating password resets, maybe that's what you start with, right? I can't answer that for you, but you can find the answer to that question with that maturity assessment. So go through that assessment and then put a multi-year plan in place to say, this is where I'm going. This is the direction that I'm headed. Steering committee, do you agree that we should tackle these things in this order? Once you get that info in front of the committee, it is essential that you find one quick win. Because ones and zeros aside, people are people, and we get distracted. If you're a large organization and there are a lot of competing projects, and you go in with all these identity things you want to do, and you try to do them all at once, but you say, yeah, I'll have something for you in 2.5 years, you're going to lose attention and funding probably within 6 months. Why am I throwing all of this money at your program if you're not actually changing things for the better? But I am changing, it takes time. Well, I don't see it, all right? So I've got other people who are willing to do things today. If you're doing that strategic plan of all the big things you want to do, scale it back and pick one thing that you could knock out that would be noticed by multiple people. I talk to a lot of people who are doing certifications, right? We have to go in and review somebody's access and say, yeah, they're all supposed to have it. talk to your audit department and ask them if the people that were doing that are just rubber stamping it, right? I've got 200 things that Jerod has access to. Yeah, he needs access to all those. Because if I say no, right, and I disrupt his ability to do his job, it's just going to create a problem for me later. But if you can go to audit and say, let's automate that process, and then all the people throughout the company, technical and non-technical, who have that responsibility of reviewing access, can be your advocates, right? You can go to them for success stories to take to the steering committee. And they say, yeah, I used to have to spend 4 days going through all these accounts and doing it, and now I do it in like an hour, right? That kind of win is going to make a big difference politically. And it's that blend of the politics and the technology to help you move your program forward. Also, when you're writing down all the things you're going to do, individual ownership, again, somebody has to be ultimately accountable. Now, you can make it a team, but it's the manager of the team who owns that responsibility. If it doesn't happen, they're the one in front of the steering committee saying, yeah, I know we wanted to do this, but I missed it, right? That's my bad. You want to have individual ownership of all these things. Otherwise, you run the risk of them not actually getting done. But once you've got that plan in place, right, you've built on everything that you've discovered. You've talked to people in the business to build context and find out what's important. And now you've written down a plan of what you're going to do. Now you actually go out and do it. One of the first things you could do from one of those quick win, well, kind of a quick win, but it's more for like long-term success, is clean up some of the directories. If you discover directories, right, once you've got a list of all the places that people can log in, ask the admin for each directory, are there any accounts that we can get rid of, right? Or permissions, are the permissions right, right? Just talk to your Active Directory administrators and ask them if there are any groups you can get rid of. Because as you start doing all this identity stuff, as you start building on all these accounts and tying things together, if you've got garbage, right, if you've got bad data, number one, you're going to be building that bad data into your system. And number two, you're going to be spending a lot of time building things that you don't need, right? What's Marie Kondo, right? Do y'all know the joy, right? My wife knows her. I don't know her, but she does the whole get rid of stuff that doesn't bring you joy, right? It's that kind of thing. You got to go through your environment and clean house so that you've got some sort of stable foundation that you're going to build that stuff on. Get into those environments and start cleaning up attributes. This gets into some of the automation you're going to look at later. You want to be able to determine what maps to what. Has anybody done EDI, electronic data interchange, right? That's where I cut my teeth in IT, right? And it's the whole notion of I've got two disconnected systems that need to share data. I need to give them a common language, right? I need to give them the ability to get data back and forth so that they both understand it. Identity is pretty similar, but it gets down to attributes that map who has access to what. So you want to go in and clean those up and then start defining roles. Is anybody doing role-based access control today? That's all right. No, even a shaky hand is good. RBAC is big and it can be daunting, but you don't have to do everything right out of the gate, right? If you just automate Active Directory account and email, right? Those two things. Number one, people can walk in on the day that they're hired and start doing something. Because I guarantee HR will already have sent them email messages saying, you need to do this training, you need to sign these policies. But it doesn't mean that you have to do down to the nth degree every little thing automated. No, just do a couple of simple things, start to make people's lives better, and then build on top of that. That basic, just a couple of things, we call that like birthright provisioning, right? That's every employee gets it. You might be able to go and say, everybody in finance gets this app, everybody in accounting gets this app, or like HR gets this app, legal gets this app. And then you can start doing departmental mappings. And then you can go down to like job code and say, if you've got this job code, it means you're manager versus employee versus supervisor. And you can build on top of all that, but you don't have to build all those roles right away. Just start with the basic birthright stuff. And then it's okay to have singletons, right? These little one-offs that just don't fit anywhere, right? You can get to a point where you can automate the request and approval and provisioning process, but people don't need to get that as soon as they hire in HR. Just get started with some basic stuff and then build on top of that. And then you're going to look back at that IAM universe and say, what can I automate? Can I automate provisioning, deprovisioning? Can I automate password resets? Can I automate who has access to what data, what file shares? And then again, the value of having audit involved early on is you're going to be able to take all these things you've done and just give it to them and say, yeah, that stuff you've been asking me for years, here it is. And you'll find with audit as your ally, that helps your budget as well. And then step 5, it's important to, again, recognize success. So track those metrics, brag on the people who are fixing things and making things better. Give them kudos if that's a extra couple hours vacation, if it's a gift card to Amazon, if it's, we used to use, kid you not, a stuffed animal at public utilities, a Beanie Baby. You remember Beanie Babies, right? That whoever was doing the cool thing that month, they got to keep the Beanie Baby on their desk, and it made a big, like it was a really big deal to the people who got it. Whatever your corporate culture is, whatever gets people going, take a minute to recognize when they have those successes. Track your progress in your assessment, give that info back to the steering committee, and then every time you've got some success story, somebody saying, look, I didn't know what you guys were doing, but after you did it, this is how it changed my job. It made it so much easier for me to do the stuff I was hired to do in the first place. Grab that. And then pizza and beer at the very least. It goes so far to just give people some simple token of gratitude to say, look, I appreciate it. Because, I mean, every one of us, we go home at the end of the days, we've got friends, we've got family, we've got pets, we've got things that we do outside of work. We are not our job. And that's true for every single person that you're going to be looping into this project, to these efforts. So recognize them, right? Give them credit for the work that they're doing, especially if you've got them staying late or working weekends or taking this on top of other work. Take time to give them that recognition. I can't emphasize that enough. And then the last step is, I lied. It's not a project, right? That the whole program thing doesn't really have a finish line. You just get to a point where the cycle starts over again, the wheel of Ka. Sorry, anybody seen Dr. Sleep yet? I'm a big Stephen King fan. My wife and I saw it this week and loved it. But the whole notion of when you get everything to a point you feel like, yeah, I've got it, go back and do that discovery again. What's changed, right? Have any of you started using SaaS applications at your company in 2019 that you did not use in 2018? No, it's kind of a wordy question, but I guarantee that things have changed over the last year for you. Things have probably changed over the last month. Things may be changing today while you're here at this conference. So you have to keep going back to ask people what's changed, what's different, and then go through that cycle again and make sure that your program is covering everything it needs to cover. And then just a few questions where I'm out of Columbus, right? We're a Blue Jackets family. So the Gretzky quote is a hockey thing, but start to ask yourself, is there a way we could be doing things differently? Or are there things that we're not even considering or planning for yet? Like I wish I could remember who it was. Somebody pitched this idea to me. What if we started like at 8 o'clock in the morning, we had a job that ran that gave people access. And at 5 o'clock, another job ran that took all that access away. And from 5 p.m. to 8 a.m., it didn't matter if they wanted to log in, they couldn't because we disabled their access. Not just disabled, we actually stripped it away and gave it back. And my initial thought was, that's crazy, why would you do that? But the more I think about it, I'm like, boy, there's work-life balance, there's reduced risk of compromise of people attacking you after hours. But I mean, it's risky. But if that's something that your company wanted to do, right? Or if you want to get away from passwords entirely, right? Whatever the thing you're trying to do, you need to incorporate kind of that future thinking, that direction into your identity program. Anybody ever been to Identiverse? bookmark that. If you're doing identity, or if you've got people at your company who are doing identity, Identiverse is a multi-day conference for some of the best identity professionals around the world. They all descend, I think it was like in DC earlier this year, and all they talk about is identity stuff. So some of it's going to be stuff like this, right? How to build a program. Some of it's going to get really deep into protocols, and depending on what your jam is and what you're looking for, you've got options. But things to look at is artificial intelligence and machine learning are disrupting a lot of industries. I worked for a firm that did accounting, and they bought a cybersecurity company that I worked for because they knew that accounting was going to be entirely different in a few years, thanks to this technology. Well, it's coming into play in how some of you probably already have some different tech, probably like your SIM technology, threat hunting tech, deployed doing some of this already. So stuff like that, go to Identiverse, or at least look up the talks after the fact and see what people are talking about. And then take that back to your steering committee and say, I'm looking ahead, this is something we need to concern ourselves with. So take a minute to get out from behind your desk and talk to people. Once you understand what you're talking about, write things down and put it into effect with your project management team. Take a minute to celebrate the small wins and then go back through the cycle again. It'll help you move the identity program forward. And I know I always run, 1 minute past, gosh darn it. Always running out of time. Any questions? So if you want the slides, if you think this info is useful, hit me up or hit up the conference organizers. We all have them. And then take them back, share them with people, start using this, and just focus on a couple of small wins and then build on top of that. So thank you very much.